My name is Bjørnestad, working with Webstep, obviously. Been working with cloud solutions for the past 10 years. So I wanted to address a topic I get questions on now and then, is kind of on a high level how people are thinking about the migration process when you're moving to the cloud. A lot of this stuff is available through the internet, so if you're just Googling 6 strategies for migration, you can find stuff on the internet there. A lot of it is based on something Stephen Orban has written. He has also made a book on this. So this is just to get you an intro and an overview, and if you're interested in more deep dives, then of course I'm open for talking to you one-on-one as well. If we're going to move something to the cloud or whatever, basically we need to have a process, of course. Typically, you start with evaluation of the opportunity. You want to move your workloads or your portfolio, whatever, into the cloud. So a business opportunity evaluation of that and stuff like that. Then we need to get into proper discovery and planning. And when we've done that, it's about looking into designing, doing the migration, doing validation, doing checks and things like that. And in the end, of course, getting out there, hopefully sooner than later, into operational modus. So we're in the cloud and we're running our workloads in the cloud. We're not going to go through the whole process here because that's kind of a lot of things to look at, but I will focus now kind of the different migration steps you can do when you're doing the actual migration here in the process. Looking at designing, migrating, and validating, and what kind of ways do we have to migrate our application or portfolio from on-prem and into the cloud. We've done some planning, we've done some assessments up front, and then we need to determine how to get from A to B into the validation step and then moving it into operations. So there are 6 different topics here we should briefly go through. Which might be good as buckets you can put your application in when you're thinking about doing the planning here, the paths. So the first one is what we're calling rehosting. Some are also calling it lift and shift. So basically you take what you have on-prem, the application or the entire server or the entire fleet, and just do work and move it as is into the cloud and make sure it is running. Sounds easy, it's not that easy. When you're looking into this, there are 2 ways of doing it. First, you have to decide whether you can automate it or whether you have to do it manual. The majority of the workloads, as we're seeing, is done manually. So people are normally taking their application and moving them manually into the cloud, kind of exporting servers from VMware, importing them into the cloud environment, just taking the application, copying it into the cloud. But there are also migration tools that can help you and can actually more or less replicate a server from the cloud. From on-prem and into the cloud while it's running, and then you have a short cutover period here. If you're doing this one is kind of the almost the strategy with the least complexity, but it's also the one that you're kind of not getting most value out of. So what you see is the savings is something like maybe 0, maybe 10, 20, 30% when you're doing it this way. But a lot of companies are doing it like this because they need to move everything to the cloud, and then you would start optimizing because it's easier to optimize it when you have moved to the cloud instead of trying to optimize and do stuff in your old legacy systems. This is also about learning how the cloud works. So when you're doing the rehosting, when you're doing the lifting and shifting, you're also learning as you go along and getting experience from doing optimization later. And Actually, we have customers who've moved kind of 600 servers from on-prem to the cloud without any huge technical hassle. They did a lot of automated moving, but also a lot of manual moving. So it was a mix. So the key here is one size doesn't fit all. You have to look at the specific application or the specific workload and decide kind of what migration strategy you want to use. So rehosting is one, and it's very, very common to use. The next one is replatforming, which means that you are looking into leveraging some of the new platform. You are doing small changes to your application. Some are calling it lift, tinker, and shift, but basically you're doing changes to maybe what kind of database you're connecting to. You might be doing some changes to the runtime you're doing. So instead of running your own database, you're swapping to a database operated by the cloud vendor, so database as a service. Maybe you have a runtime. If you have a Java application running on Tomcat on Windows on-prem, maybe you're running that on Linux in the cloud. So basically, you're doing some changes to the platform, but you're not doing a lot of changes to the core architecture of your application. And you kind of have to do that change and check it, and then again, take that into the cloud and do the normal validation and move along. Since you're doing changing here, and when you're doing changes like this, you will need to have test more. So as much as possible, try to use tooling when you're doing the moving here, because you're going to do it over and over and over again. And if you're using some tooling, partly manual, partly automated, then you're kind of having a consistent set you're moving. Consistent movement here, and then you're getting the servers into the cloud. As we go along, as Benedicte mentioned, or Cassandra mentioned, if you have any questions, please post it in the chat. Next step is repurchasing. When you have a portfolio of application, remember that you don't have to move everything. Replacing, or some are calling it drop and shop, is typical for off-the-shelf, commercial off-the-shelf applications. You're moving it into a SaaS solution. You're having a CRM system on-prem and you want to move your workloads to the cloud. There is no reason you should kind of move the server to the cloud if the vendor have a SaaS offering, and you can easily hook into that. So typically the repurchasing option is for standard workloads from HR. It's might be accounting system, might be content management systems like WordPress, stuff like that, CRMs, archiving systems, etc. So have this in mind as well if you're getting into migration projects. Do you have any applications or systems that you can actually purchase as a SaaS solution instead, and get it up and running? Of course, there will be some configuration, there will be some initial setup for integration, stuff like that, but look into that. Also have in mind that a lot of off-the-shelf software today is end of life running on-prem. So more and more CRM systems, HR system, accounting systems will not be delivered as installables for running on-prem or on your own servers in the future. Then we have refactoring here. That's kind of the most complex one. That's refactoring what you're doing, refactoring the platform. You're getting in, determining a path, saying that this one we really need to redo. We need to redo the entire, more or less the entire application, because it's not going to be good running it in the cloud. Typically also it might be that business is waiting for new functionality and they need it fairly quickly. So then you really need to get into starting redesigning the application. You need to look into the infrastructure here. You need, of course, to do code development. You need to look into software development lifecycle and stuff like that, and do the proper integrations. Most complex one, and also the most expensive one, but then you're getting the benefits for moving into the cloud as well immediately when you're starting using this in the cloud, because you don't have done some of the optimization up front. Typically would be that you're going from a monolith and you're breaking it down into microservices or serverless and things like that when you're choosing refactoring. I've seen some people doing some refactoring of some applications, but as mentioned, it's the most complex one and it takes more time. So if you're in a hurry, do the refactoring after you moved it. And most people are actually going for that one. So that is 4 paths to do stuff. And there are actually 2 things we've forgotten here. And people also are maybe not thinking about that when they're thinking about what kind of migration strategy they should use. One is actually retain. Do you have any systems you don't want to move? It might be that the system is just living for another 6 months or for another year. So maybe you want to retain it on-prem or just move it to a colo location. But also remember to revisit it later in case you want to move it later, because you might want to retain it because it's also too complex to move. So typically look into that, don't forget it. And sometimes people are choosing to retain some systems because it looks rather complex to move it, but as they're moving the rest of the applications, gravity is also helping you moving it later. Typically, it might also be applications that are not that important to your business, so you're actually considering ditching them at a later stage. Last one is retire. This is a good time to get rid of all systems that people are never using. At last, you're discovering servers and systems and application is running. Nobody's owning them, nobody's using them, but nobody has dared to turn them off. But when you're starting rambling around in your portfolio, you will discover things like that. So get rid of them, retire them, stop using them. And of course, doing that at this point in time will help you on the business case of moving into the cloud, because you have applications you're not moving into the cloud and which you don't spend money on operating later. Also, old systems that you're not using pose a threat to security because they're normally not petted. So, which means people are not patching them, they're not taking care of them. So who knows what's going on there. So there we are, the 6 R's of migration: rehosting, replatforming, repurchasing, refactoring, retain, and retire. If you're Googling the 6 R's, you will see it on the internet, on blog posts and stuff like that. As mentioned, this is not something I've invented, but I think it's a very good way of thinking when you're doing migration. Quick recap on complexity, kind of heat mapping. Refactoring is the most complex one, then replatforming. And of course, the least complex ones are retire and retain. 6 R's listed here. The presentation will be available to you after this, and then it's just about Googling it or get in touch if you have questions. My contact details are here, but here is the link to my presentation. So that's it for me this morning. I hope it was valuable and look forward to talking to you about this in the future. Thanks.